Life has a funny way of changing when you least expect it. For Robert Chen, everything seemed perfect on the surface. At 45, he had built one of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley from the ground up. His modern glass mansion sat perched on a hillside, overlooking the glittering city lights below. But what made him most proud wasn't his wealth or his company's success, it was his marriage to Grace, his college sweetheart and partner of 20 years. Grace wasn't just his wife, she was the backbone of their success story. While Robert focused on innovation and product development, Grace managed the company's finances as CFO with remarkable skill. They had started in a tiny garage apartment, eating instant noodles and dreaming big. Now, their company employed thousands of people and was worth billions. Their only unfulfilled dream was having children. They had tried everything, countless fertility treatments, specialists, and procedures. Each failure brought them closer together, their shared pain becoming a quiet strength. They had eventually accepted that their legacy would be their company and the charitable foundation they had created to help underprivileged kids pursue careers in technology. Their routine was comfortable and predictable. Every morning, they would share breakfast on their terrace, planning their day while watching the sunrise. Grace would tease Robert about his habit of forgetting to eat lunch when he was wrapped up in new projects, and he would promise to do better. She would leave post-it notes in his office with simple reminders: eat, or take a break, workaholic. These little moments of care had kept their love alive through the busiest years. Everything changed when Lisa Wan joined the company as their new head of marketing. At 28, she brought fresh energy and innovative ideas that caught everyone's attention. She was brilliant at her job, turning their traditional tech marketing approach into viral campaigns that captured younger audiences. Robert found himself spending more time in marketing meetings, fascinated by her modern take on technology and consumer behavior. At first, Grace noticed small changes. Robert started missing their morning breakfasts, claiming early meetings. His phone would light up with messages late at night, and he would step out to take calls. The post-it notes stayed untouched on his desk. When Grace would stop by his office for their usual lunch date, his assistant would say he was in meetings, marketing meetings. Their weekly date nights became monthly, then rarely happened at all. Robert's excuses seemed reasonable on the surface: important client meetings, urgent project deadlines, international video calls. But Grace had been by his side long enough to know something was different. The way he would jump when his phone buzzed, the late nights at the office, the distant look in his eyes when she tried to talk about their future plans. The company's employees started whispering. They noticed how Robert's eyes would follow Lisa across the room during meetings, how he would laugh a little too hard at her jokes, how their business discussions would run late into the evening. Grace heard the whispers but pushed them aside. After 20 years of marriage, she trusted their bond would survive anything. Then came the annual charity gala, their biggest event of the year. Grace had spent months organizing it, making sure every detail was perfect. She wore a beautiful blue dress that Robert had always loved, hoping to reconnect with her husband during their favorite social event of the year. But Robert seemed distracted all evening, checking his phone and disappearing for long periods. When she couldn't find him during the main presentation, Grace went looking. She checked his office first, empty. Then the conference rooms, one by one. In the last room at the end of the hall, through the glass door, she saw them. Robert and Lisa were standing close, too close. He was touching her face in a way he used to touch Grace's, looking at her with eyes full of something Grace hadn't seen in months: desire. Grace stood frozen, her hand on the door handle, as 20 years of love and trust shattered in an instant. The room seemed to spin, the distant sound of the gala becoming a dull roar in her ears. She watched as her husband, her best friend, her partner in everything, leaned down to kiss another woman. She didn't make a scene. Years of being in the public eye had taught her better than that. Instead, she walked back to the gala, smiled through the rest of the evening, and played her role perfectly. But inside, her world was crumbling. The perfect life she had built, the love she had trusted, the future she had planned, none of it was what it seemed. That might mark the beginning of the end of their perfect life. What Grace didn't know then was that this ending would lead to an unexpected new beginning, one that would change not just her life, but the lives of 4 special children who didn't yet exist. The morning after the charity gala, Grace woke up alone in their massive bedroom. Robert hadn't come home that night, claiming he needed to handle an emergency at the office. She sat at their breakfast table, staring at 2 untouched cups of coffee, watching the sunrise alone for the first time in years. Her phone lay silent beside her, no morning message from Robert, no silly emoji that used to be their little tradition. The company headquarters felt different that morning. People avoided eye contact as she walked through the corridors, their whispers following her like shadows. Her assistant, who had been with her for 8 years, couldn't meet her eyes when she handed over the day's schedule. The truth was spreading through the office like wildfire, and Grace felt every scorching glance. She tried to focus on work, reviewing financial reports and attending board meetings as if everything was normal. But her mind kept drifting to the scene from last night, the intimate moment she witnessed through that glass door. 20 years of memories played through her head like an old movie. Their first date at a cheap pizza place, Robert's nervous proposal in the rain, late nights working on their startup, celebrating their first big contract with takeout Chinese food on their apartment floor. Around noon, her computer pinged with a new email. Her hands trembled as she read the subject line. About us, important. Robert, her husband of 20 years, had sent her a divorce notice through email. The words blurred on the screen as tears filled her eyes. He wrote about growing apart and different life paths, corporate speak for replacing her with someone younger. The man who had promised to love her forever couldn't even face her to end their marriage. The news exploded in the tech world by evening. Social media buzzed with speculation and rumors. Photos of Robert and Lisa at various business events surfaced, analyzed by strangers who thought they could spot the exact moment their affair began. Grace's phone wouldn't stop ringing, journalists, friends, family, all wanting to know her side of the story. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was watching how quickly Robert rewrote their history. In interviews, he painted their marriage as loveless for years, claiming they had stayed together only for the company's sake. Each word felt like a knife, stabbing at the memories Grace held dear. The late-night conversations, the shade dreams, the way he used to look at her, had it all meant nothing. The board called an emergency meeting a week later. They spoke about public image and company stability. Grace sat there, listening as they suggested she step down as CFO. The position would be too awkward given the circumstances, they said. The company she had helped build from nothing was pushing her out, treating her like a liability rather than the asset she had been for 2 decades. Lisa was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer the same day Grace cleaned out her office. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Grace packed away 20 years of her life into cardboard boxes, awards they had won together, photos from company milestones, the small cactus Robert had given her on their first day in the new office building. Each item held a memory that now felt tainted. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Robert's lawyers were efficient, offering her a generous settlement in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. The press painted her as the bitter ex-wife, while Robert and Lisa became the new power couple of Silicon Valley. They were photographed at exclusive restaurants, technology conferences, and charity events, all places Grace used to go with Robert. Grace retreated to her hometown, away from the spotlight and whispers. She bought a small house near the beach, finding solace in the sound of waves and seagulls. The settlement money meant she would never have to work again, but the emptiness of her days weighed heavily. She had lost not just her husband, but her purpose, her career, and the future she had planned. But life has a way of offering second chances when you least expect them. One morning, as Grace sat on her beach-facing porch, she remembered something that would change everything. In their last attempt at having children, they had created and frozen several embryos. The fertility clinic still had them, and under the terms of their divorce, she had the right to use them. The thought took root in her mind, growing stronger each day. She was only 42, still young enough to carry a child. Maybe, she thought, there was a different kind of future waiting for her. One that didn't depend on Robert or the company or anyone else. As she watched the waves crash against the shore, Grace made a decision that would set in motion events that nobody, especially not Robert, could have predicted. She didn't know then that this decision would lead to not just one miracle, but 4. She didn't know that years later, Robert would regret every choice that led to this moment. All she knew was that for the first time since the charity gala, she felt hope. Sometimes she would realize later what feels like an ending is really just the beginning of a much better story. The fertility clinic hadn't changed a bit. Grace sat in the same waiting room where she and Robert had spent so many hopeful mornings, but this time she was alone. The magazines were different, the receptionist was new, but the nervous energy in the air felt familiar. Her hands clutched her old medical files as she waited for her name to be called. Dr. Wilson, her longtime fertility specialist, welcomed her with a warm hug. She was one of the few people who knew the whole story, not the tabloid version, but the real journey of a couple who had tried for years to have a baby. The doctor's office still had the same motivational posters, the same model of a reproductive system that Robert used to joke about. "Are you sure about this, Grace?" Dr. Wilson asked, reviewing the files of their frozen embryos. "Single motherhood is challenging, and with multiple embryos." She trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Grace nodded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've thought about nothing else for weeks. I'm ready. I know it won't be easy, but I've never been more sure of anything." The next few weeks were a blur of appointments, hormone treatments, and careful planning. Grace told no one about her decision, not her family, not her friends, and certainly not Robert. This was her secret, her chance at the family she had always dreamed of. She converted the guest room of her beach house into a home office, knowing she would need to work remotely as a financial consultant to maintain her privacy. The procedure itself was quick, almost anticlimactic after all the build-up. Grace lay there afterward, hands resting on her stomach, imagining the possibility growing inside her. The 2-week wait that followed was both endless and too quick. She took long walks on the beach, talked to her maybe baby, and planned for every possible outcome. When the pregnancy test came back positive, Grace cried for an hour, happy tears this time. But the real surprise came during her first ultrasound. Dr. Wilson moved the wand over Grace's stomach, then moved it again, her eyes widening. "Grace," she said slowly, "I'm seeing multiple heartbeats." "Multiple? You mean twins?" Dr. Wilson shook her head, still looking at the screen. "I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 distinct heartbeats. You're carrying quadruplets." The world seemed to stop for a moment. 4 babies. 4 little lives, each carrying a piece of the love story that had ended so painfully. Grace felt dizzy, overwhelmed, and absolutely thrilled. The pregnancy was classified as high risk immediately. Grace had to be extra careful, following a strict diet and exercise plan. She hired a small construction crew to add 2 more bedrooms to her beach house, explaining that she was planning to start a bed and breakfast. In reality, she was preparing for her instant family of 5. As her belly grew, so did her determination to keep the pregnancy secret. She ordered everything online, from baby supplies to maternity clothes. When neighbors asked about her growing bump, she simply smiled and changed the subject. She knew the media would have a field day if they found out, and she wanted to protect her babies from that circus. The hardest part was the loneliness. There were moments when she wished she could share the amazing feeling of 4 babies kicking with someone else. Times when she would wake up at night, worried about raising 4 children alone, with no one to tell her everything would be okay. But then she would remember the email divorce notice, the cold legal meetings, the way Robert had erased their life together, and her resolve would strengthen. She spent evenings reading parenting books and planning for the future. 4 cribs, 4 college funds, 4 of everything. It was daunting, but Grace had always been good with numbers and planning. She set up trust funds, researched the best pediatricians, and found a reliable housekeeper who could help after the births. As her due date approached, Grace thought about Robert more often. He had married Lisa in a lavish ceremony covered by all the major tech magazines. They looked happy in the photos, but Grace noticed something in Robert's eyes, a shadow of something that looked like regret. She wondered how he would feel knowing that his only children were growing inside the woman he had left behind. One quiet evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, one of the babies kicked particularly hard. Then another joined in, and another, until it felt like a tiny dance party in her belly. Grace laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. This wasn't the life she had planned, but maybe it was the life she was meant to have. She had no idea then that these 4 little lives would grow up to be extraordinary, or that their existence would turn Robert's carefully rebuilt world upside down. All she knew was that every kick, every heartbeat on the ultrasound, every tiny hiccup she felt was a reminder that sometimes life's biggest blessings come disguised as its greatest challenges. As she drifted off to sleep that night, her hands protectively cradling her growing belly, Grace smiled. Let Robert have his young wife and his billion-dollar company. She was about to embark on the greatest adventure of all, motherhood, and she was ready for every beautiful, chaotic moment of it. The babies arrived on a stormy night in October, 2 weeks earlier than planned. Grace had just finished reading a bedtime story to her unborn children, a habit she developed during her pregnancy when her water broke. Her carefully packed hospital bag was by the door, and her trusted housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, drove her to the hospital while making calls to Dr. Wilson. The delivery room buzzed with activity. 3 doctors, multiple nurses, and equipment Grace had never seen before. Through it all, she remained focused and calm, drawing on the strength she'd built over months of preparation. After 4 hours of labor, she heard the first cry, strong and defiant. Within the next 20 minutes, 3 more voices joined the chorus. 3 boys and a girl, just as the ultrasounds had predicted. They were tiny but perfect, each weighing just over 4 pounds. The medical team worked efficiently, checking vital signs and ensuring each baby was healthy. Grace caught glimpses of dark hair, tiny fingers, and faces that made her heart stop, faces that looked so familiar. She named them thoughtfully. Andrew because it meant strong, Brian meaning brave, Charles meaning free, and Diana after the moon goddess. Each name chosen to reflect the strength she hoped they would have, the courage they would need in life. As she looked at their tiny faces in the nursery, she saw pieces of herself and, undeniably, pieces of Robert in each of them. The first year was a beautiful chaos. Grace barely slept, operating on a military-precise schedule of feedings, changings, and short naps. Mrs. Chen proved invaluable, helping with the endless laundry and cooking nutritious meals. The beach house, once so quiet, now filled with the sounds of baby coos, cries, and eventually laughter. Each baby developed their own personality early on. Andrew was the serious one, watching everything with intense focus. Brian was the adventurer, always trying to roll over first. Charles was the peacemaker, seeming to sense when his siblings were upset. And Diana, the youngest by 3 minutes, was the natural leader, her cries often setting off a chain reaction among her brothers. Grace documented everything meticulously, first smiles, first teeth, first words. She kept 4 baby books, each filled with photos and milestones. Sometimes, late at night, she would look at their sleeping faces and see Robert's features. Andrew had his determined chin, Brian his expressive eyebrows, Charles his thoughtful gaze, and Diana his curious eyes. These moments would make her heart ache, but they also reminded her of the miracle she had been given. As the children grew, their personalities became more distinct. By age 3, Andrew was already fascinated by numbers, carefully counting his toys and organizing them by size. Brian could build impressive block towers, understanding balance and structure intuitively. Charles showed an early love for music, humming tunes he created himself. Diana would gather her brothers for elaborate pretend games, naturally taking charge of their adventures. Grace worked from home as a financial consultant, setting up her office to have a clear view of the children's play area. She took on select clients who didn't ask too many personal questions, earning enough to complement her savings and provide for her growing family. The children never wanted for anything, but she raised them to understand the value of hard work and kindness. The resemblance to Robert became more pronounced as they grew. By age 5, it was impossible to ignore how much they looked like their father. Grace saw it in the way Andrew furrowed his brow when concentrating, just like Robert did during business meetings. In how Brian's eyes lit up with excitement over new discoveries, in Robert's enthusiasm for innovation, in Charles's gentle way of helping others, reminiscent of how Robert used to be, in Diana's natural leadership, so like her father's ability to command a room. Their intelligence was extraordinary. By first grade, all 4 were reading at a 4th grade level. They showed a particular aptitude for technology and problem-solving, traits that made Grace both proud and nervous. She knew these gifts came from both parents, her analytical mind combined with Robert's innovative thinking. Keeping their existence secret became more challenging as they grew. Grace chose a small, private school that valued discretion, explaining that she was a single mother by choice who valued her privacy. She managed to avoid most questions about their father, but she knew this couldn't last forever. The children were too exceptional, too much like their father to remain unnoticed indefinitely. Sometimes, Grace would catch glimpses of Robert on tech news websites or business magazines. He and Lisa appeared in society pages, always smiling, always perfect, but never with children of their own. Grace wondered if he ever thought about the family he might have had, if he ever dreamed about the children he didn't know existed. As their 7th birthday approached, Grace watched her quadruplets working together on a complex puzzle. They moved in perfect sync, each understanding their role without words. Andrew analyzed the patterns, Brian tried different approaches, Charles kept everyone focused, and Diana coordinated their efforts. In moments like these, Grace knew she had made the right choice. What she didn't know was that their carefully constructed world was about to change. In a few years, these brilliant children would step into the spotlight, and their father would discover the incredible legacy he had left behind. But for now, in their beach house sanctuary, they were simply a family, unique, unconventional, but bound together by love and the strength of a mother who had turned heartbreak into happiness. 12 years had changed everything and nothing. Grace's beach house was now filled with science projects, musical instruments, and the controlled chaos of raising 4 preteens. The quiet seaside town had become home, a safe haven where her children could grow up away from the spotlight that still followed their father in Silicon Valley. The kids had inherited not just their father's looks, but his brilliant mind for technology. One morning, Grace found all 4 of them huddled around a makeshift computer lab they'd set up in the garage. Andrew was coding, Brian was building hardware, Charles was working on the user interface, and Diana was sketching out marketing plans. They had created a revolutionary app that helped elderly people monitor their health and medications. "Mom, we want to enter the National Youth Science Fair," Diana announced at dinner that night. Her brothers nodded eagerly. Our project could really help people. Grace's heart skipped a beat. The science fair was a huge event, covered by major media outlets. Robert's company was even one of the sponsors, but looking at their excited faces, she couldn't bring herself to say no. These children had inherited her determination along with their father's innovation. They wouldn't take no for an answer. "We'll be careful, Mom," Andrew promised, reading her concern. "We've already registered under your last name, not Dad's." The preparation consumed their lives for weeks. The garage became a full-time laboratory. Grace watched in amazement as her 12-year-olds created something that could rival products made by professional tech companies. They called it Cara Connect, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. The day of the science fair arrived crisp and clear. Grace helped her children set up their booth, her heart swelling with pride. They looked so grown up in their matching blue blazers, Andrew adjusting the display screens with precision, Brian fine-tuning their prototype, Charles preparing their presentation, and Diana practicing her pitch. What Grace didn't know was that Robert was attending the fair that year. His company's new focus on healthcare technology made it a priority event. He walked the aisles with Lisa, who was talking about their latest publicity campaign, but his mind was elsewhere. Their marriage had become a carefully maintained public image, empty of the warmth and connection he once had with Grace. Then he saw them. 4 kids at a booth, demonstrating something on a tablet. He stopped walking mid-sentence, his heart pounding. The way the tall boy furrowed his brow while explaining the code, it was like looking in a mirror. The second boy's excited hand gestures as he showed off the hardware were exactly like his own. The third boy's gentle way of helping an elderly visitor test the app reminded him of himself at that age. And the girl, her confident leadership style, her way of commanding attention, it was uncanny. Lisa noticed his sudden stillness. What's wrong? But Robert couldn't answer. He was studying their faces, their movements, their features. They looked about 12 years old. His mind raced, calculating dates, remembering the fertility treatments he and Grace had gone through before their divorce. The kids were drawing a crowd. Their project was impressive, revolutionary even. He'd heard whispers around him. They're quadruplets. Single mom raised them. Absolute geniuses. Robert moved closer, his legs feeling weak. He could hear them speaking now. The girl was explaining their inspiration. Our grandmother had trouble managing her medications, so we created something to help all grandparents stay healthy and independent. Their grandmother, his mother. The story was true. She had struggled with her medications before she passed away. These children couldn't have known that unless one of the boys, the serious one who reminded him so much of himself, looked up and met his eyes. There was a moment of recognition, though Robert knew they had never met. The boy's eyes whitened slightly, then he turned to whisper something to his sister. Diana looked up, her confident presentation faltering for just a moment as she saw Robert. She recovered quickly, but her siblings had noticed. All four of them were now stealing glances at him while continuing their demonstrations. Grace, who had been talking to one of the judges, finally noticed the commotion. She turned and saw Robert standing there, his face pale with shock. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and 12 years of secrets hung in the air between them. Lisa was pulling at his sleeve, asking what was wrong, but Robert couldn't look away from the children, his children. They had his nose, his eyes, his way of moving. How had he not known? How had Grace kept this secret for so long? The crowd around the booth grew larger as word spread about the brilliant quadruplets and their innovative project. Reporters were gathering, attracted by the buzz. Camera flashes started popping. Robert watched as Grace smoothly stepped in front of her children, shielding them from the growing attention. His children won first place that day. As they accepted their award on stage, Robert couldn't take his eyes off them. They moved as a unit, supporting each other, finishing each other's sentences. Everything about them spoke of exceptional intelligence and deep family bonds. They were everything he had ever wanted in his children, and he had missed every moment of their lives. The truth hit him like a physical blow. While he had been chasing success and youth, Grace had been raising their children, 4 brilliant, beautiful children who had just revolutionized elderly care at age 12. Children who looked at him with his own eyes, but didn't know him as their father. As the ceremony ended and Grace quickly ushered the children toward the exit, Robert stood frozen in place. Lisa was asking questions he couldn't answer, reporters were approaching with more questions, but all he could think about was one thing: he had 4 children, and he had missed 12 years of their lives chasing what he thought was happiness. The weight of his choices crashed down on him as he watched his family disappear into the crowd. He knew nothing would ever be the same after today. The perfect life he thought he had built was about to unravel, all because of a science fair project created by 4 extraordinary children he should have known from the day they were born. The morning after the science fair, Grace's peaceful beach house became the eye of a storm. News vans lined the quiet street, reporters camped out on the beach, and her phone wouldn't stop ringing. The children sat at the kitchen table, picking at their breakfast, trying to process how their lives had changed overnight. "Are we in trouble, Mom?" Charles asked quietly, his gentle nature showing concern for everyone else's feelings first. Grace gathered her children close. "No, sweethearts. You did nothing wrong. You're amazing, and I'm so proud of you. This is just complicated adult stuff we need to handle." A knock at the door made them all jump. Through the frosted glass, they could see Robert's silhouette. Grace had known this moment would come, but she still wasn't ready. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. Robert looked older than he had at the science fair. Dark circles under his eyes suggested a sleepless night. Lisa wasn't with him. For the first time in 12 years, he was facing Grace alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with emotion. "They're my children too." Grace stood firm in the doorway. "You made your choice 12 years ago. You chose your new life, your young wife, your fresh start. I chose our children." The quadruplets had gathered in the living room, watching this exchange with intense focus. Diana, always the protector, stood slightly in front of her brothers. Andrew analyzed every word and gesture, while Brian seemed ready to jump into action if needed. Charles quietly observed, his emotional intelligence picking up on the undercurrents of pain and regret. "We know who you are," Diana spoke up, her voice clear and strong. "We've seen you in tech magazines. You're Robert Chen, the billionaire who left our mom for his marketing executive." Robert flinched at her words. I didn't know about you. If I had known." "You would have what?" Grace interrupted. "Stayed out of obligation. These children deserved better than that." They deserved to be loved unconditionally, not to be a reason for someone to stay in a marriage they didn't want. The truth of her words hung heavy in the air. Robert looked at his children, really looked at them. Andrew's serious expression matched his own when dealing with difficult problems. Brian's stance showed the same restless energy he had at that age. Charles's empathetic eyes reflected the person he used to be before success and ambition changed him. And Diana, she had Grace's strength with his determination. "The app you created," he said, addressing the children. "It's brilliant. It could help millions of people." "We know," Andrew replied coolly. "We've already had offers from 3 healthcare companies. But we're going to develop it ourselves," Brian added. "We want to help people, not make money," Charles explained. "And we learned from Mom how to build something meaningful," Diana concluded. Their unity, their brilliance, their moral compass, it all struck Robert like physical blows. These extraordinary children had grown up without him, shaped by Grace's strength and values rather than his wealth and ambition. The media circus grew louder outside. Reporters were shouting questions about the quadruplets, about the secret children of tech billionaire Robert Chen. His phone buzzed constantly. Probably Lisa, his PR team, the board members, all wanting to know how to handle this scandal. "I want to be part of their lives," Robert said quietly. "Please, Grace, let me know them." Grace looked at her children, seeing the mix of emotions on their faces: curiosity, apprehension, hurt, hope. "That's not just my decision anymore. They're old enough to have a say in this." The quadruplets huddled together, having one of their silent conversations that only they understood. After a moment, Diana spoke for all of them. "We need time. This is a lot to process. We have school, our project development, our normal lives. We can't just suddenly become the billionaire's secret children." Robert nodded, understanding the wisdom in his daughter's words. These children had inherited not just his intelligence, but Grace's emotional depth and clarity of thought. "Mom protected us for 12 years, Andrew said. "She's the one who believed in us," Brian added. "She never missed a science fair or a piano recital," Charles continued. "She's our parent. You're just our biological father," Diana finished. The words hurt, but Robert knew he deserved them. He had spent 12 years building his empire, while Grace had built something far more valuable, a family. News of the quadruplets broke worldwide that day. Robert's carefully crafted public image crumbled as the story spread. Lisa left him, unable to handle the revelation that he had 4 children with his ex-wife. His company's stock took a hit as investors worried about potential inheritance disputes. But standing there in Grace's living room, watching his 4 brilliant children support each other and protect their mother, Robert realized he had lost something far more precious than money or reputation. He had lost the chance to see his children grow up, to shape their characters, to be loved by them as a father. As he left the beach house that day, walking through the crowd of reporters without answering their questions, Robert understood that everything he had thought important over the past 12 years meant nothing compared to what he had missed. His children were his greatest achievement, but they were Grace's triumph. She had turned his betrayal into a miracle, his absence into strength, and his loss into their gain. The real work, earning their trust, understanding their lives, becoming worthy of being their father, was just beginning. And this time, Robert knew money and power wouldn't help him. This would take something he had forgotten how to give: unconditional love, patience, and respect for the family he had almost thrown away. The path to redemption began with small steps. Robert started by attending the quadruplets' weekly therapy sessions, sitting quietly in the corner, listening to how his absence had shaped their lives. He learned that Andrew struggled with trust issues, that Brian channeled his anger into building things, that Charles worried about keeping everyone happy, and that Diana carried the weight of protecting her siblings. "Why did you leave, Mom?" Andrew asked during one session, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. "We've read all the news stories, but we want to hear it from you." Robert looked at his children, then at Grace, who nodded slightly. It was time for the whole truth. "I was foolish," he began. "I got caught up in success and ego. Your mother and I built something amazing together, but I started believing my own publicity. I thought I deserved more, wanted something new and exciting. I didn't realize that what I had was already perfect." The children exchanged glances, that unique bond allowing them to communicate without words. It was Charles who spoke next, his gentle nature seeking understanding. "Did you ever think about having children with Lisa?" "We tried," Robert admitted, "but it never happened. Now I understand why. My chance at being a father was already here with you four. I just didn't know it." Months passed, and slowly the family found a new rhythm. Robert attended their science competitions, this time sitting beside Grace in the audience instead of as a corporate sponsor. He watched in awe as their health app gained national attention, proud that his children chose to make it freely available to those who needed it most. The kids began spending occasional weekends at his house, turning one of his sleek, modern rooms into a chaotic workshop. Brian and Andrew covered the walls with diagrams and code. Charles brought in a piano, filling the once quiet space with music. Diana added colorful artwork and project planning boards. Grace watched this careful dance of reconciliation with mixed feelings. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset while the kids worked on their latest invention inside, Robert turned to her. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, "or theirs." "This isn't about deserving," Grace replied. "It's about what's best for them. They need to know their father, understand where they come from, even if that father is just learning how to be one." Their co-parenting relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and their shared love for their children. The media eventually lost interest in the story, finding new scandals to chase. The family could finally heal in private. The quadruplets' high school graduation came faster than anyone expected. The school auditorium was packed, not just because they were the children of a famous tech billionaire, but because they had earned their own reputation for brilliance and innovation. All four were valedictorians, each with perfect grades and groundbreaking achievements. They had decided to share the graduation speech, taking turns at the podium in the same way they shared everything else in life. Andrew spoke about persistence. Success isn't about being the richest or most powerful. It's about staying true to your values, even when life tests them. Brian followed with passion. Innovation should serve humanity, not just profits. Every problem we solve should make the world a little better. Charles added wisdom. Family isn't just about blood or birth. It's about the people who show up every day, who love you unconditionally, who help you become your best self. Diana concluded with hope. "Our story isn't typical. We were born from love that ended, raised by strength that never wavered, and found forgiveness we didn't expect. But every family has its own journey, and every journey has value." Robert and Grace sat side by side in the audience, both with tears in their eyes. The past 4 years had changed everyone. Robert had stepped back from his company's daily operations, focusing instead on a foundation that helped single parents pursue education and career goals. Grace had started mentoring women in tech, sharing her story of resilience and renewal. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos, Robert watched Grace arrange their children for a picture. They were heading to different colleges, Andrew to MIT, Brian to Stanford, Charles to Berklee College of Music, and Diana to Harvard. But they had already planned how to continue developing their healthcare innovations together remotely. "Mom, Dad, come join us," Diana called out. It was the first time she had called him Dad, and Robert's heart skipped a beat. Grace squeezed his arm gently as they joined their children. As the camera clicked, capturing the moment, Robert realized that true wealth had nothing to do with money. His greatest fortune was standing right here, 4 brilliant children who had inherited the best of both their parents and who had learned through their mother's example how to turn pain into purpose. The family gathered that evening at Grace's beach house, now a second home to all of them. As the sun set over the ocean, they shared memories and dreams. The quadruplets excitedly discussed their college plans while Grace and Robert watched with pride. "We did good," Grace said softly. "Despite everything, they turned out amazing." "You did good," Robert corrected her. "I'm just grateful they gave me a chance to be part of their lives now." The story that began with betrayal had transformed into something unexpected, a testament to love's ability to heal, forgiveness's power to transform, and family bonds that grow stronger through adversity. As the stars came out over the beach house, the sound of laughter and conversation drifted through the open windows, proving that sometimes life's greatest chapters come after what we think is the ending.